Father, we just thank you for your goodness to us. Thank you that we can gather now and just look into your word as we continue looking at being called to be a servant. And as we continue looking at the passage tonight, Lord, we do pray that you will help us and strengthen us into being the servant you want us to be as we look at your example. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay,
Amen.
we're going to continue studying being called to a servant from the same verses that we haven't finished yet. Isaiah 42, 1-4. But let us remind ourselves of our motto for Christian service, which you should all know by now. And look at that, it's not working now. A servant is not about making our name known, but about making God's name known. So, as I said to you right at the beginning, that is the focus. We've already seen in this passage, if you've got your Bibles, open to Isaiah 42, 1-4, and I think we've read it enough, but we'll have keep it open at that as we're going to continue on tonight in that passage. And we've looked at firstly, we've looked at the servant has the Holy Spirit, and he said, I will put my spirit on him. And last time we met together, we looked at servant brings justice. And we said there were many ways we could serve those who've experienced injustice, but we will keep it to 3. I did have 4, but when I was doing it today, I thought, man, if I do 4, we'll never finish. So I'm keeping it to 3 areas of this justice that we should bring. And the first one we looked at was the area of being generous. The first area of serving biblical justice is radical generosity. And we looked at the fact that secular individualism says that your money belongs to you. Socialism says your money belongs to the state. But we're saying, the Bible says that, you know, what we're given, we're stewards. The second way we're going to look at tonight is how we serve biblical justice is an area which is actually quite apt for today's world. And that area is the area of equality. You know, sadly in our world today, justice is often based on a person's status or a person's wealth or you know, who they know, their connections. Hence the common statement that we hear in the world today, there is no justice in our system. But biblical justice requires, and we're going to look at this, biblical justice on the part of the Christian requires that we treat every person according to the same standards, same respect, and that is regardless of class, of race, of ethnicity, of nationality, of gender, or of any other social category. One of the things we've seen in our world is that justice is often delayed for those who are rich, and justice is often never given for those who are poor. And we see this so often. We see it in the sentences, even in New Zealand, that are given out to people. If you're a certain race, or you're a certain class, or you've got this money, or you're a sports person, or things like this, you'll notice how light the sentences are compared to the normal people. But I just want us to look at some verses. So, John, can you look up Leviticus 19, verse 15? And Buddy, can you look up Deuteronomy 16, 19? So I'll put them up on the screen so you can see them, and then you, what they are.
Hard to read with them being read.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I'll change that next time.
That's right. Leviticus
19, verse 15.
Yes.
John, can you read that? And
yes.
Buddy, Deuteronomy 16, 19, when I ask you to. Okay, John.
Leviticus 19:15. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly.
Okay, and I'm going to read the Living Bible because I just like the way they put it. Judges, must always be just in their sentences, not noticing whether a person is poor or rich. They must always be perfectly fair. And Buddy, can you read Deuteronomy 16:19?
Deuteronomy 16:19. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent.
Okay, so we see right from the beginning, God said justice is for all. The biblical idea really is unique and revolutionary in world history. Surrounding cultures and societies knew nothing of this equal justice. And you can often see that in the way that they handed out justice. But God set it up so that everyone should be fair. And this idea of equal worth and equal dignity is something that we see in our world has really gone away. The world has gone away, even in our Western society. You know, we don't look at our society as corrupt in a sense, do we? You go to the Philippines or India or any of these other countries and you can see corruption very, very clearly. But I think you find a lot in our country, the corruption comes in the way sentences are given. I was looking at something the other day, I just can't remember where it was, but what the person had done, the judge said, you'll do 12 months home detention, which wasn't equivalent to the crime she had committed. But, you know, they had a bit of status. And I think the biblical idea of fair justice is not seen in our world. And it comes back to this whole idea that every human had equal dignity and equal worth. And it was just as foreign to the Greeks and the Romans in the time of Jesus. In fact, Aristotle famously said that some races and nationalities deserve to be slaves. Now that's anti-biblical. That's anti-biblical. Tom Holland writes that ancient cultures, apart from Israel, completely lacked any sense that the poor or the weak might have the slightest value. You know, when they looked at the poor and the weak, and you see this when you watch programs of the old times, don't you? You look at some of the programs that are on, and the slaves and the poor and the weak were downtrodden, and kings that would make them pay more. And what the Greeks, Romans, and other ancient cultures lacked was really the book of Genesis, which teaches that all human beings were equally created in the image of God. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he that created them. So we see this idea that we are all equal before God. And I have a friend in the Philippines who would often say this, and you've probably heard me say it in messages. We've often, what are you trying to do, Ray? You're trying to get into my screen. You see this idea that everyone has the same understanding or dignity, I mean, and value in the eyes of God. And as I was saying, a friend of mine says everyone is equal at the foot of the cross, but that is not seen in our world. And even in, you know, the Bible actually assumes that everyone is equal. You know, even if you're a slave, you're still equal right and equal dignity and equal respect. And in Proverbs, not working again, hold on, I've got to get the arrow back over. Yeah. So the Bible assumes it everywhere. In Proverbs 14:31, he says, whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. In Proverbs 22:2, he says this, the rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. So as a servant, we've got to come back to this whole idea that we are all under the same law or under the same maker who is God. And we may have different status, we may have different wealth, but when it comes to God, we are all equal. And we actually see this with Jesus's life, that Jesus showed this equality. In fact, Jesus shocked the idea of the day by receiving and treating all classes of people, no matter who they are, with equal love and respect. This is a servant. This is a Christian servants. So we start off with Samaritans. So Ave, can you read Luke 9:51 to 56, please? I've missed the reference here. 9:51 to 56.
At Luke 9.
Luke
Yeah.
51 to 56.
51. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven and destroy them? But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village.
Okay. Understand, Jews would never go through Samaria. It was an unclean place. It was a place where Jews avoided. They would go an extra, kilometers to get round Samaria, then they actually walk through it. And we have the other story that I haven't used, the one of the Samaritan woman, where Jesus actually spoke to that Samaritan woman outside of the social norm. But he treated them with equal respect, equal dignity. And you look at James and John, and remember John is the one who wrote 1 John, which we're looking at the moment. Their response as Jews, let's destroy them. Because to a Jew, the only good Samaritan was a dead Samaritan.
Yes.
That's how, how the Israelites or the Jewish people saw Samaritans. But Jesus showed equality by saying, no, they're just as important. Don't destroy them. We'll go on to the next village. And we've got to realize that, Jesus showed this equality in his life. Ray, are you still with us?
Yep.
Okay. Can you look at Luke 4:25 to 27, please? This is the next place that we see equality shown by Jesus.
Luke 4, what? 25,
25
right?
to 27. Yep.
Yep. I assure you that there are many widows in Israel in Elijah's time. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Oh, yep. When the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. Yeah, I've lost it now. Yeah.
To a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman, the Syrian. Now, Jesus is telling them, he nearly touched off a riot when he declared that God loved the Gentiles. For once again, the Jews see Gentiles, even to this day, they still see Gentiles as a dirty race, as an unclean people. But Jesus showed that we are all equal, and he was trying to point out to these guys that we are all equal, despite our race, despite where we come from. But then he went on to something that was totally out of the norm. And John, we're back to you again. Can you read Luke 5:12 to 16?
Yep.
You'll notice a lot coming out of Luke today, because I think Luke is a gospel that really deals with people.
Okay, Luke 5:12. While
16.
Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that the crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed.
Okay. Jesus reached out to those who were sick, who were diseased, who were the outcasts of society. He was touching them, and he defied all the contemporary prohibitions. You know, when you think about it, who are some of the people that probably we wouldn't touch or wouldn't go and see, or you know, now leprosy is something that we can deal with, but back then it wasn't. But think about today, who is people that we probably would have second thoughts about going and dealing with? The homeless?
Yes.
Yeah, people are not really clean, isn't it?
Yeah, people are not very clean. You know, we've talked about this. You go into someone's house and it stinks. So you sort of think, well,
Yeah.
I'm not going to that place. Jesus would have. You know,
Same with people. Yeah, people who haven't got good hygiene, isn't it?
yep. And we're more concerned about what will happen to us and what is happening to them. You know, that's not showing equality as a servant. A servant shows equality. And yes, we've got to be careful, but at the same time, Jesus did not turn them aside or turn them away. And I think it's really important that we as a Christian servant are showing equality to all, no matter what situation they find themselves in. And, you know, some people, well, I know that Ray and I have just experienced recently a house that was just a mess, and the person was a mess, and it would have been easy just to say, give up on her and, you know, let's not worry about it. But thankfully, you know, the Lord has helped her in getting rid of her house and all that, and helped her out. But I think often, and this is something I really am strong against, I guess, is when people say, well, it's their own fault.
Right.
They made some bad decisions. I really, as a Christian, that should not be in our mind. Yes, they may have made some bad decisions, but who of us has not made bad decisions about things?
Me.
Maybe. Oh, you're such a perfect guy, right? But you know, when you think about it, you know, we've got to show equality. Let's go on to the same similar thing, but Luke 17, 11 to 19. Buddy, can you read that one, please? Luke 17, 11 to 19.
Luke 17, 11 to 19.
Mhm.
Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourself to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, Rise and go, your faith has made you well.
There's a lot in that if we really want to pull it apart. But again, he was on the border of Samaria and Galilee. He touched, he went, he saw lepers, he helped them. And it's interesting that said, no one but this foreigner. And, you know, he had this equality. It didn't matter who you were, he was still willing to reach out. You know, and I think it's really important in our lives that as we serve God, it doesn't matter who we come across, we should be willing to show Christ's love to them. It's so easy to push them aside. But then I go on to another area, and in the Bible, and Avril, it's up to you, Luke 19, 1 to 10. We look at these people in Luke 19, 1 to 10, and they're the tax collectors. Now, they were considered the dregs of society because they betrayed their own people by charging way more than the Roman emperor required. So they were actually stealing from their own people. They were Jews who were stealing, running from their own people. Now, I was thinking about that. How does that apply to our day and age? And I was thinking, what about the prisoners? You know, are they our tax collectors of the day, betrayers, stealing from our own people? So let's read Luke 19, 1-10, and how Jesus accepted it.
So Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be with the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save which was lost.
Okay, fantastic passage, though, and we often hear about it. But it's just interesting to me. There's a couple of things that interest me. One was that Jesus looked up and said, I'm eating at your place today. Now, you've got to remember, in that society, here was Zacchaeus, a tax collector, a man not liked amongst the Jews. He had crowds following him. And Jesus says, I'm coming to your place to eat. And look at the response. What was the response of people? In verse 7, they all grumbled and said, he's gone to be with the sinner. You know, that tells me that there was this inequality on the part of the people that were following Jesus, whereas Jesus showed equality. And I think really we've got to guard ourselves against that attitude when we're dealing with people. And like I say, it could be, you know, prisoners. Yes, there's justice in that, but we've got to be there for them. And I love what he said, you know, salvation's come to this house, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Now, that verse 10 there is exactly the same as our mission as servants. We're out looking for the lost and to bring salvation to them. And that's really where this equality comes in. But there's one more group that I think, and we faced this when we came back from the Philippines in 2003. We faced it in the Philippines as we worked with them. But this is the group that we would call prostitutes, loose women. And, you know, we don't agree with what they do, but I've heard Christians really talk horrible about women who are in this trade, and it's sometimes not nice. And one day the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees wanted to set a trap for Jesus so they could humiliate him in public. So they got this plan, bringing in a woman who they claim was caught in the act of adultery. Well, what that first actually means is that she was a prostitute, and asked whether she would be stoned. Now, think about it. There's a number of things that they said. There's 1, there was sex. 2, there was a woman. 3, a public disgrace. And 4, a double standard. They brought all those before Jesus because they wanted to trap him. And their view of her was that she should be stoned. And really, the woman was used as a pawn and a power play to discredit Jesus. But if we go to John 8:2-11, who are we up to now? Ray, John 8 verses 2-11.
Yeah, I've got it here.
Okay. Read
Right,
it now,
at
please.
dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him and sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? They were using this as a question, as a trap, in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. I keep putting my finger on the thing. It goes. I've lost it.
Verse 9 now.
All right. Where are we? Verse 9.
You're verse
All right.
9 now, yeah.
Yep. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Dispute over Jesus.
That's enough. Up to verse 10. Yep. Over to verse 11. That's good.
Stop me now.
Yeah, I'm stopping you now.
Yeah.
Do you think Christians need to hear that a bit more?
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know, you think about it. Here was these religious leaders. She was caught in act, but you know, maybe we need to hear this whole thing. Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. Now, I was thinking about this a little bit, and I was thinking, we're prostitutes, gay people, we really come down hard, don't we? And we don't agree with what they do, but Jesus brought salvation to them. Instead of giving them a simple yes or no answer, he stooped down and wrote in the dust. Why was he looking down on the ground? What was he writing? We don't know. Jesus didn't mean adultery was okay.
No.
He wasn't doing that. He said he challenged us on our individual responsibility for participation in the act of condemning someone else and therefore exposing their hypocrisy. Now, would any of us claim to be sinless? Of course not. Okay, and there were these religious people who were there, and they were bringing this woman to him, and they were saying that, but what they were basically saying, we're better than this person. But Jesus was showing that we're all sinful. And the fact that, you know, in the Middle Eastern culture, people naturally turn to the oldest persons for such circumstances. So they would look to the elder to, you know, have courage to stand up with Jesus. But they all slipped away, one by one, beginning with the oldest, while Jesus bent down and wrote in the dust. We don't know what he wrote, but I just think by looking at the ground, Jesus probably did not watch the public humiliation of those who accused the woman. His focus was not humiliating the hypocrites, but saving the woman. And that's what grace is about. And that's what a servant is all about. We are to show grace to people that are really outside what we would call our good standards. And that can be quite hard. I've shared with you many times of a friend of mine who would stand outside gay bars telling them they were going to hell as they walked out. Didn't work. All it did was say, oh, those Christians are all bigots and they're against us.
Mm.
And at the same time, when you sit down and talk with these guys, you know, some of them like sports, some of them like, you know, things that you like, but what they're doing may be wrong, but you get that opportunity to share with them and build up into their lives. And I think that's something as a servant, we finally get to where Jesus stood, not even one of them condemn you, no, Lord. Jesus said, neither do I, go and sin no more. And we've got to get to that point as servants of God, but not with a outright preaching against them in their face. You know, he never condemned or approved the lifestyle that she was living, but he forgave her sin, he removed its penalty, and told her to turn back from the former way of life. So he called for a reformation to both the accuser and the woman without a hint of humiliation. And one thing I have often seen as Christians humiliating people who are perhaps on that, what we would call the bad types. And we've got to be careful of that. As a Christian, so if you want to get into, if you're called to be a servant, we've got to learn how to talk to people with respect and with dignity, even though we don't agree with them. And you know, there's all that sort of thing. And I think this story actually teaches us not to be too quick in condemning others struggling with sin. It may be sin different to ours, but they're still struggling. We're struggling, and we all need to turn back from our own habitual sin in order to follow Jesus. That's what a servant does. We've seen Jesus shows it by equality. And for me, a servant brings justice by treating all people equal, no matter who they are, no matter who comes into your life, no matter who you see on the street. There's always got to be this area of dignity. Now, this isn't in my notes, I'm just going to throw this in. What about when people don't show you dignity and respect? How do you respond?
It shouldn't make any difference.
It shouldn't.
No, it shouldn't, but maybe sometimes it does. But I'd like to say, Shane, that with people, with women that are in the sex trade in the red light districts overseas, like in India, Cambodia, and third world countries, we have to realise that they don't. Sometimes they don't have a choice of what occupation they have, and we need to get our head around that. And then our attitude might also change towards them.
Yeah.
And it could also be in New Zealand, you know, I don't know, but also, yes, you have to be respectful of people, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. We work with the prostitutes in the red light district in Manila. And, the majority of them were, they were trying to put their sister or brother through college or supporting their families.
That's right.
And the sad thing there was they were often controlled by, well, we know what a pimp is, and the pimps were the police, you know, so it's actually quite sad. But we come in with our righteous standard and say these people are absolutely terrible, but we can't be like that. In fact, when we held Bible studies in that area, a lot of them didn't want to be in that trade, but they couldn't get jobs doing anything else. And it's so easy for us as a West to say, well, there will always be another way, but we don't understand the struggles of people overseas. You know, if that was the way, why do we have so many Filipinos, Indians, Sri Lankans in our countries working? Because life is really hard. And you know, it's sad for me to see. We'll keep it to New Zealand. New Zealand Christians treating immigrants in a bad way, or treating other people in a bad way, or treating gay people or prostitutes or prisoners in a bad way because of the decisions they've made, which may have been wrong, but it doesn't mean they've lost their dignity. It doesn't mean they've lost their respect. We show respect to those people, and we come into their lives.
Yes.
We don't know their background either, do we?
No.
That's right.
Because we had one of our girls that we fostered. She's running a brothel now, but her father molested her when she was very, very young. I mean, he got put in prison for nine years and then deported. But I mean, you could condemn her, but I mean, to be honest, she had a terrible start in life, isn't it?
Yeah. And often the response to that, well, you know, she could have got out if she wanted, but we don't know that. We don't know that, you know, and this is where I'm saying, as a Christian, we need to really learn, you know, to treat people with respect and dignity. Yeah, their job may be something that we don't agree with, but it doesn't mean they've lost their dignity or their respect. And God has created them. And if we come across those people, God has put them in our paths so that we can show them who Jesus is and show them how they can find Jesus. There's another story I want us to look at. it's also a prostitute in Luke 7:36-50. Now, this is a fairly long passage, but I just think it's good if we go through this. Someone willing to read it? Luke 7:36-50. Or we could do, 37-40 and then 41-56. 36-40 and then 41-56. 50, sorry.
Okay.
Any-
I'll start off. This is verse 36. Now, one of
Okay.
the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he cancelled the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt cancelled. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my hair with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time she entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. It's interesting that it doesn't say anything, that the woman didn't say anything to Jesus.
Mm.
She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't, but he told her that her sins were forgiven.
Yeah, because of the act, I think that he
Yes.
realized it. Yeah. And I think
Yes.
that's important. Another thing that's really interesting in here is that often it's not mentioned. Notice it was a Pharisee's place. Now, we've looked at Jesus going to the tax collectors. He's gone to the prostitutes. He's gone to the lepers. Whenever we hear about the Pharisees, all we hear about is how bad they are, the hypocrites and that. But isn't it interesting here, Jesus actually went to a Pharisee's place, same equality, same dignity, and although he had a wrong view, he didn't get upset with what Simon was saying. He followed him. Now, when you think about this woman, her gesture was basically financially and socially costly. She poured expensive perfume on Jesus' feet, but she wiped them with her hair in public. Now, if you understand the culture back then, a woman would not have her hair out in public. So she pulled out her hair and wiped it. Women used to wear a head covering as a sign of piety, but she was making an ultimate pledge of Jesus by taking her hair out and wiping his feet. And tears in her eyes, the other guests watching, she wasn't committing anything other than saying, I have come here and, I'm showing you that I love you, Lord. And Simon's response was this, Jesus should know she's a sinner. So what does that tell you about Simon thought about himself? He must have thought himself quite righteous. He was offended by her coming and treating this, and he wanted to avoid people like that. And I asked that question, how often do we try and avoid people that perhaps are a little bit different from us? I think we've got a few in our chapel. They're quite different. They take a lot of work. You can think of Polly, you can think of Bruce, and who in Toronto. They take a lot of work.
You're not talking about me, are you?
I wasn't going to name you. but you just got to think. Yeah. But I just think, if we are truly a servant of God, it doesn't matter who comes in or who we meet, we will treat them with the same respect and the same understanding and the same dignity. But outside of that, there's something else. There's some things that I got out of this, the moral of the story. The first one I saw, and you might have seen it too, you might have something else. The more forgiveness one receives from Jesus, the more costly love one can offer back to him. And we often see that, don't we? They may not have a lot of knowledge about Jesus, but because of their lives that they've had and God has forgiven them, they just love him with a real passion. And I think that's what he sees here. The other thing I see here is people judge others based on the outward appearance or reputation. But Jesus looks at the heart and offers boundless grace to all who turn to him in faith. Now remember, Jesus is our example of a servant. Jesus is the heart of a servant. It shows us what a heart of a Christian servant is. So that means when you meet someone who doesn't meet your standard, our standard, we don't look at the outward appearance or their reputation, but we look at them with the eyes of Jesus. He had grace for all. And that is the mark of a Christian servant. That is the example of a Christian servant. You can talk to anybody because you have dignity and respect. And interesting in that, often people can see if you have dignity and respect for them. And they can tell when you're condescending and condemning them. So it's really a heart thing that we have to come back to the Lord and really ask him to, help me to have true love for those outside of Christ and those with Christ, in Christ, because it is very easy to hate those who are in Christ as well. But we need to come back to the Lord to really say, give me a heart of Jesus that doesn't condemn. And you already mentioned it, Ave. The woman didn't utter a single word,
No.
but her actions spoke louder than any words. Now, compare that to where Jesus was with the Pharisee. They had all the words, all the righteous things, all the right words, knew how to pray, but they had no love for Christ. And here was this girl, this woman, sinful woman, no words, but her actions showed that she loved the Lord. And I think that's really important in our lives as well. Jesus exhorted his disciples not only to be generous to the poor in Luke, but to welcome them into their homes and their families in Luke 14 and verse 13. So hospitality in that time was an act of friendship and partnership. When you invited someone in, you're saying, you're equal to me. If you invited a poor person into your house back in those times, that was shocking. What are you? Who are you? What sort of person are you? Why would you have that person in your house? Why would you even talk to that person? That was the culture back then. But Jesus broke all that and said, bring them into your family, bring them into your house, bring them in and help them. And through the parable of the Good Samaritan, which we all know, so we won't read it, Luke 10:25-37, Jesus defined loving my neighbor as giving practical, financial, and medical aid to someone of a different religion and a different race. He noticed the person that was on the ground. A Jew man came along, a Levite came along, a Pharisee came along, crossed the road. Our neighbor is whoever is in need. So both doing justice and loving one's neighbor means treating people of all races, all religions, all social classes as equal in dignity and in worth. And that's something we need to really work on. And honestly, the rest of the New Testament follows that rule as well. If you look at James 2:1-6, you read of how he says, brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, you sit here in a good place, while you say to the poor man, you stand over there or sit down at my feet, Have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich ones who oppress you and the ones who dragged you into court? And maybe not here so much, but Buddy and I will know in the Philippines, if you're rich, you're given a place of importance. You're lifted up, and the poor person comes in and it's just a servant. You cook the meals, you clean the church, and we've got to be careful that doesn't creep into our own Christian life. That if someone comes in, I often say, if the Prime Minister walked in, would I treat her the same as I'd treat a homeless person, with dignity and respect? And sometimes that can be hard. If particularly, you might not agree with the Prime Minister, but you've still got to show dignity and respect. And then on the other side, you may not agree with the homeless person, but you've got to show dignity and respect. I think if you want to say something, just butt in. I know I'm talking a lot, but if you want to say something, feel free to butt in. Just, I can't see Ava Ray, but just butt in if you want to say something.
Yep.
I think one of the something I read in John Calvin's Institute of Christian Religion, I'll put it up here. The great part of the human race are most unworthy if they be judged by their own merit, he says. So if we judge ourselves on our own merit, we're all worthless. But here Scripture helps in the best way when it teaches that we are not to consider what men merit of themselves, but to look upon the image of God in all men, to which we owe all honor and love. And I remember one of our elders in the Philippines speaking. He says, when you look at someone, what do you see? Do you see the clothes they wear? Do you see the house they live in? Or do you see the image of God? And he's trying to get us to realize that we should see the image of God in all people. And John Calvin goes on and says, therefore, whatever man you meet who needs your aid, you have no reason to refuse to help him. We remember not to consider men's evil intention, but to look upon the image of God in them, which cancels and effaces their transgressions, and with its beauty and dignity, allures us to love and embrace them. Christians must put themselves in the place of him whom they see in need of their assistance and pity his ill fortune, as if they themselves experienced and bore it, so that they may be impelled by a feeling of mercy and humaneness to go to his aid, just as to their own. That's exactly what Jesus did, didn't he? He understood our condition. He saw how we were. He came here. He lived among us. He experienced our lives, and then he went and he paid the penalty for it. So a servant brings justice by treating all people equal. And I think that's the second thing that we show justice. The next way we bring justice by being a servant is in the area of advocacy. We're getting on pretty late, so I'll just read some of these verses. Just look at the Psalm 41, verse 1. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of the trouble, the Lord delivers him. The word consideration here means believers are to pay close attention to the weak and the poor, seeking to understand the causes of their condition, not find fault with the cause of their condition, and to spend significant time and energy in helping them change their life situation. And when you look at some of the preachers of old, that's what they went in and set up in little towns, and they got involved with the drunkards and the drug addicts, and they really got in there. And I think somewhere along the line that slipped out of the church along the centuries, the ages. We are supposed to be considerate of them. Right? Proverbs 29:7, a righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. We see this, don't we? The wicked or people who don't believe in Christ, they treat the poor, they take away their rights. The church should be the one advocating for the rights of those in these situations. And I'm not talking about going on the streets. That's our next area we look at in Isaiah 42. But we should be there to help them, to spend time with them, and interesting, Leviticus 19:5 says this: while we are to treat all equally, not show partiality to any, Leviticus says this: you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. We are to have special concern for the poor, the weak, and the powerless. And that could be widows, that could be single mums, that could be homeless people, the prisoners, all these things. We advocate for them. You know, we advocate, we're there for them. We stand beside them. So I want us to open to Proverbs 31 verses 8 to 9 and just answer this question according to those two verses. What are we to do according to verses 8 to 9? 31, 8 to 9. Can someone read those, please? John, can you read them, please?
Proverbs again, please.
Yeah, 31 verses 8 to 9.
Thank you. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy.
So there's two things we see here. What's the first one that John read there, that we as servants are supposed to do?
Judge fairly. Speak up.
Before that, yeah, speak up.
Mm.
Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. So
Yes.
as I thought about this, I thought that's interesting. So I've asked this question: what are some ways we can do this? How can we do this? Speak up for those who don't speak for themselves. How, as a Christian servant, can we do that?
Mm. Like the unborn child.
Okay, yep. So what can we do there, eh?
Mm. Advocate for them living and not dying.
Yep, okay. What else?
The people that are low income and, you know, they need help with having their rights.
Mhm. It's very, one of the things I thought of is, you know, and I know Ray's doing this, you know, often going to wins with them, helping them, because a lot of them don't know their rights when they go to places like that, or even, you know, just going for a license sometimes. And it's interesting how people just won't say it, you know, won't say anything. They just accept it and go move on.
Yes.
And often their rights are being trampled on. Now, I know I've said that no one has rights except unless they're in Christ, but the Bible does say there are certain things that, you know, the poor or the weak, and the weak are, they may not be poor, but they may be weak. We need to stand up for them. The widows, often, you know, there are those who are struggling. I know of a lady in Hazelmere who really struggles health-wise, emotionally, mentally. You know, and we need to stand up for these people. We need to be able to go and call up. And I know it seems a lot of work, but should that be the reason we don't do it?
No.
Because if we're being called to be a Christian servant, God expects us to speak up for these people and help them out. And it takes time and it takes energy. But of course, the goal is that we get the opportunity to share the gospel with them, which may take a long time. But there's one other thing you know, you talked about judge fairly, yes, but there's another thing in the second verse that really comes out strong. Not only are we to speak up.
Oh, I see, for the rights of all who are destitute, speak up.
Defend.
Defend the rights of the poor and needy. We are asked to defend the rights of the poor and needy. We, you know, it really saddens me when I hear people go like Ray's involved in CAP. And it really saddens me when people say, well, they've got themselves, it's their own fault. And I know Ray thinks the same way. That really grinds at me, and I'll stand up for a person. And, you know, underdogs, people who are trodden down by others. You know, as a Christian servant, our responsibility is to defend them. We may not agree with what they're doing, they may not agree with their lifestyle, but, you know, we're still to defend them as a person, as in dignity and respect. And, yeah, what do you guys think about that?
Yes, you do. Yes, and it's just to be, you know, in the right place at the right time, to be helping people with that as well.
Yeah, and God puts us in those places. You know, some people have a real ministry of going soup kitchens. Okay, they're great and they're good, but is it helping those people? And, you know, we've got to help them, but we've also got to bring the gospel to them. But we are to defend their rights, you know, and this is, I guess this is something that I have been struggling with our soup runs on during the year, where the MPI has stopped that.
Yes.
Or with the meat, giving out meat, which we still do, by the way, quietly. You know, they're trying to stop people who are in need having their needs met. And the church has to come in there, and the Christian servant has to come in there and help them. But in defending the rights of the poor and needy, is that a contradiction of everything else we looked at? I mean, we've looked at the Bible, it says, you know, all people have respect, all people should have dignity. So are we now saying that only the poor and needy? Well, of course not. The Bible doesn't say speak up for the rich and powerful. It doesn't mean they're less important as persons before God. They most certainly are equally as important, but they don't need us to speak up for them. Because however, the poor do. The call to advocacy assumes that the poor and the immigrant have equal rights. Deuteronomy 24:17 and 19 says, do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that your Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hands. So the Bible tells us we are supposed to look after. If you're wealthy, you can look after those who are struggling. Chris Wright explains the phrase is literally, do not turn aside the rights of the aliens, the fatherless and the widows. And so it's more in the Old Testament. It's not so much a matter of rights. It's more a matter of rights than charity. It wasn't charity. It wasn't considered charity. It was the right of the poor to be able to go into the fields. You know, so this call to advocacy assumes that the fact of our fallen world is a highly uneven distribution of opportunity and resources. And we see that, don't we? Some people are born into a privileged family. They automatically have friends. They automatically have connections with power. They automatically have social capital that paves the way in life. And Proverbs 14 says, the poor are shunned even by their neighbors, but the rich have many friends. And I think, you know, we've got to realize that often some of us get a better start in life than perhaps a lot of the people we're dealing with. The poor don't have such capital. You know, it's interesting, a survey was done, and I'll just read this. Children in poor neighborhoods usually grow up with inferior schooling and in an environment extremely detrimental to learning. That's abuse. They're often open to alcoholism. They're open to drugs. And many people may argue that this is the parents' fault, while others will say it's the failure of social policy. But no one believes that it is the children's fault. They are born into a world without friends who can open doors for them. And we need to realize that, you know, when we're dealing with a lot of people who are struggling in life, They don't have the opportunities, and often they may not, you'd be surprised how many people that we deal with have dropped out of school. At 15, they left school, trade school cert, and they left it. And it's interesting, I've talked with people about this. They said, well, they should have stayed on in school and got their university degree. I say to them, that's just condemning them for the opportunity that they didn't have. And I think we need to be really careful when we judge people in their situation. The call to advocacy assumes the reality of oppression. I've seen, and I know Buddy would have seen it himself in the Philippines, that there are numerous ways the wealthy can turn things around to their advantage in the courts, in the marketplace, in the community, always at the expense of others. And we need to be very aware. And Proverbs 22 says this: do not exploit the poor because they are poor, and do not crush the needy in court. And across the cultures and across the centuries, we have seen that the less well-off are more likely to be convicted and receive greater penalties for the same crimes that those with greater resources commit. Okay. Proverbs 11:26 complains about sellers hoarding grain to drive up the prices to gouge the poor. And we see that often, those who are in the position, you think about, I can't think of any New Zealand examples, probably because there might not be that many, but say in the Philippines, rice as a main commodity in the Philippines. And back in the 90s, they discovered that the rice importers were hoarding the rice in their warehouses to drive up the price of rice in the market. So we used to buy rice for 12 pesos a kilo. What is it now, buddy? 70?
Yeah,
About 70 pesos a kilo. And it's the rich are getting richer. They're still paying a low price because it's imported from Vietnam and Thailand, but they hoard it in warehouses so that there's an unavailability, and then by doing that, they increase the price in the market for the poor person who has to pay it if they want to eat. And I think the Lord talks about that we're not supposed to do that. In fact, in 24 verses 14 to 15, he talks about taking advantage or literally robbing short-term laborers by failing to pay them daily. Jeremiah 22:3. Sorry, I didn't write all these down on the thing. 23:3 says, protect the person who's being cheated from the one who is mistreating foreigners, orphans, or widows. And Jeremiah is, singling out groups of people who can't protect themselves from the mistreatment the way others can. So in comes the Christian servant, and he stands or she stands up for those people. And it may, you may have a few enemies. I remember when one of the guys in the Philippines, he took it upon himself to free the captive prostitutes and child and sex trade. And, it was just so hard because he actually got to know the daughter of the vice president, and the vice president himself said to him, you be careful, because the people that are in charge of that are high up. And, it's just how the rich oppress. Of course, the supreme advocate for the poor is God himself. He takes up the cause of the needy and calls his people to do the same. In Proverbs 22:23 says, do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate, for the Lord will plead their cause and rob of life those who rob them. Jesus is the same. Luke 18:7-8, it says, and will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Jesus himself takes on the role of the advocate in Luke 16, verse 14. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things and they ridiculed him. And then the scribes with their airing houses, widows' houses. Luke 20:45-47. Jesus stood up for these people. He stood against these wealthy and well-known and people. And often, why do you think we stand back instead of standing up for these people when it comes to, like, say it's government, or say it's a wealthy? Why do you think we stand back?
Can be too hard.
Yeah, it can be too hard. Fear?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You still
You
with us,
often
Frank?
find that
Yeah.
you often find that you're hitting your head up against a brick wall, don't it? So you probably give in too quickly.
Yeah, that's something I think we often do. We come out with this negative, oh, it's no use, it's not going to change anything anyway.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think we need to be careful of that. So I know we're taking longer than I thought we would, but how do we do advocacy? So I looked at this next. Okay, how can we do this? And I think there's 3 ways that we can do it. First thing is direct material relief, which is what we see in Luke 10:30-35, the Good Samaritan. You know, we see people in need as a Christian, and you see this in the New Testament, don't you? You see them providing food for the Greek widows and the Hebrew widows. There was this direct material relief that they gave. Our advocacy here is focused on getting a personal, family, legal, medical, financial, and other resources they needed to face a crisis. We as Christians should be standing in there. I know it's easy to say it's the government's job, but a lot of people, you know, if you've had to deal with government, you know it's not that easy. And a lot of people in the lower income bracket will give up before they get what's rightfully theirs, because they just say, but as Ray said, hitting a head against a brick wall. So we can come into that with food bank, or, you know, providing help in certain areas, counselling, financial, we've got CAP. So that's one area. The second area, I think, is the empowerment of people, helping a person or family or community gain self-sufficiency. And it's interesting, in Deuteronomy 15:13-14, it says this: and when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. As the Lord your God has blessed you, you shall give to him. So empowering people is investing in ways that help that person or family or group come to the place where they have the resources and forms of capital, social, financial, cultural, whatever it is. So they're no longer in the position of needing advocacy and help from outside. And that's something that we probably need to work on. I'll be the first to admit that. I think it's easy to give people food and send them on their way. But I think biblical advocacy is, how do we empower that person to change his circumstances? Of course, the gospel will bring that, as Brad talked about on Sunday. But we need to think about it in our own lives. How are we empowering people, or are we enabling people to carry on the way they are, their behaviors? So as an advocate, a Christian advocate or Christian servant, we need to look at how can we empower this person. Maybe it's helping them get their license, or maybe it's helping them get a job, or maybe it's helping them grow a garden, you know, those sorts of things. You might have other ways that you could think is how we can help them as well. You know, but as a Christian servant, we should be looking to empower these people. And the third thing I thought of was taking on social structures. Job 29:17 says, I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. So he's pretty powerful verse, that, because he didn't give up. In those verses, he broke the fangs of the unrighteous. So we take on the social structures that disadvantage certain groups. Okay, so we're not only feeding them, we're not only clothing them, but we look at how we can change things in the structure of stuff. And that is quite hard to do, actually. I don't know, Ave and Bray, you're involved in this regularly, trying to change the structures of people's lives with the CAB and the CAP. It's not easy.
No. what we do is like you just give information to people and encourage them, and then they need to make up their own mind about things. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting. As I was looking at this, how can we
'cause
do
we
that?
can see. Sorry.
Go on, Ray.
Yep, talking about that helping people, and then we can see how well, I say easy it is, but logically, to convince these people, not always very easy, that it's like that client that for selling a house. I mean, she's going to have a house taken away from her by Avanti, wasn't it? And but to convince her to try and sell it herself, I don't want to move, and you think to yourself, oh, it's very hard sometimes, isn't it?
It is.
When
And
you
that's
know the
because-
right path. Yeah.
And I think that's because people, when they're in those situations, they can't see outside.
Mm.
And it's very easy for us to come in there and say, well, this is how you should be doing it. But we've got to understand people can't see that. And thankfully that client did end up agreeing with us to sell her house and saved her a lot of hassle, because she could have sold it. Avanti could have sold it. She would have got nothing. But, we've got to understand that when people are in a difficult situation, they can't see. It's like they've got blinders on.
That's right.
And we're there to try and encourage them. You can't demand people.
No.
The more you demand, the more they rebel against that. But we've got to be working alongside them, and so to break down those structures or break down those barriers, and that's why Christian servanthood is perhaps one of the hardest ministries in the Christian faith, because you've got to spend time, you've got to take time and really work at it. Where I can go to cafe and I spend a couple of hours speaking to people and talking, and they go home. But when you're actually out there in the community working with people, it takes time. And my time is precious. That's the idea that comes in, isn't it? My time is more precious than that person. But Jesus's wasn't.
I think with Cap, I've learned quite a bit how to be patient, because I'm pretty an instant sort of person. Why can't you do this now? So I've had to learn to pull back a bit and be more patient.
Well, that's an example, Ray. You're trying to get all these papers from people, and you can see it's just easy. Just ring the people, get an email. But the person who's on that other end, who's actually in the situation, says, I have to talk to someone, and they're going to say, we're not going to make the next payment, and what am I doing, and why aren't I paying? And so they fail to make that call. And that's where that patience comes in. And that's what we've got to realize. People in the situation are struggling. And if we just come in with this is how you do it this way, it's not going to work. And Ray, you've worked that by breaking things down, by telling people, well, if you do one every day and 3 or this, and you get it all done in a week, and it only take. So we've got to look at ways of how we can help. It's just interesting. I just want to finish off with these last 3 things. How can we take on the structure? Well, the church may forbid its members from participating in unjust social structures. Paul forbade Christians taking part in man stealing, which was a slave trading based on kidnapping, something that was common in Roman society in 1 Timothy 1:8. Jesus commanded his disciples and followers in Luke 14 to completely abandon the patronage system, which is a major source of social equality. You're up here. And that brought down this whole idea of men up here, dogs here, women down here. He broke that and said, get away from that. You're all equal. Sometimes taking on social structures means speaking publicly against rulers and leaders who are doing wrong. And if you look in Daniel 4:27, Daniel calls a pagan king to renounce his sins by being kind to the oppressed. And I think we have a role to play in that. We may, in government, we speak up against the abortion law. I mean, we haven't changed it, but we've spoken up. We're trying to break these social structures that are around. And if you really look at it, Jesus's ministry brought him into conflict with the ruling power often. And the ruling power then was Herod. And it's interesting, I just read this verse, Luke 13, 32 to 33. He publicly rebukes a political leader. He says, at that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you. And he said to him, go and tell that fox. Would you call your prime minister that? Or the queen?
No.
Yeah, you see. But because of his stand, Jesus took a stand against the social structure. And sometimes we need to. So just to finish off, I think, being a servant, a Christian servant, we bring justice by being an advocate for those who are in need. And it does take our time. It does make it hard. But, that's the example of Christ. And sometimes, some people are really good at it. Some of us have to really work at it. But I do believe that as a servant of God, we are to bring justice where there has been injustice to people around us. And in that, bringing the gospel to a point where we can share with them. They will have to accept, they have the chance to accept or not accept, but never write someone off. That's not our right. That's only God's right. Okay, we've got to the end of this study. Anyone want to say anything or ask anything?
One thing I think is with people trying to help people, and like if you think 1 to 10, and 10 is where we'll say where privileged people are, like us in a sense, because we are privileged people. And some people might be 3 out of 10, and they might never get to 10 out of 10, but to get them up ever so slightly, a bit more, and not to be worried about if they're never going to get to 10, but just to increase their lifestyle as much as you can, and certainly like sharing Jesus with them. It's not to put pressure on yourself either, but to encourage.
Yes, very much so. And I will say at this point, when a person accepts Christ, they might be a 3, they'll come up to a 5, because their finances change, their emotions change, their spiritual life changes. And if the church is doing what the church is supposed to be, those people are no longer in need. So sharing Christ with someone is or when a person accepts Christ, that is the quickest way to change a person's status from a 3 going up or a 1 going up. But we've got to remember, not everyone's going to be the same of us, and we need that. People are going to think differently. People are going to act differently.
Yes.
And as Christian servants, we've got to be willing to accept that. It may take. What I can't accept is when we say, "Well, this is me, and God's got to accept me how I am." That's not biblical, because the Bible says we are constantly changing, becoming more like Christ. So there's got to be that idea that we want to change. You can't just say, "God, accept me like this." That's it, bang. But there's got to be that desire. Now that I've accepted Christ, I want to become more like Christ. And there will be things, and all of us are working through that. We're all together on that one. Not
That's
one
right.
of us is righteous. Not one of us has reached that mark where we're all good. Well, I thank you again for tonight's study. Next week, we'll move through the next few in Isaiah 42. And there's still a few, and we'll get through those next week. I'm working on finishing Isaiah 42 next week, and then they're going on to Jesus washing the feet of the disciples for our last one. Okay, would anyone like to close in prayer? Okay, are you going to do it, John?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Just reading in Isaiah 41, I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. Do not be afraid, O worm Jacob, O little Israel, for I myself will help you, declares the Lord, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. So yeah, it's good to know there's help out there.
Amen.
Pretty big stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give thanks.
Yeah.
Father, we thank you that even though we feel inadequate and useless, you can take us by the hand, make us helpful. make us usable, and be able to take others by the hand and help them, and so that they can appreciate you, our great Redeemer and our Savior. Father, we ask for your grace. Thanks for Shane and the work he's put into this. Bless him for it and bless us, we pray. Amen.